Hi everyone, I'm Chris Sauter. Today's webinar topic is PDM user training, and my goal for this webinar is for this to act as kind of like a refresher for existing PDM users, as well as an introduction for anybody who's a new user to PDM. I'm not going to get too deep into any of the features or functions, but rather provide a short overview and try and explain how the tools are used and what they might be used for. If you've already had PDM training, then some of the stuff I'm showing you, you may have seen already. But hopefully there might be something I show you that you missed in the original training. Before we get going, let's start off with some theory and let's get some answers to some typical questions that we kind of run across a lot from end users when we're providing this training. So to start off, what is PDM? Well, PDM is what's known as product data management, and it's the use of software to track and control data. Information about the data is stored in PDM, and it's electronically filed away and managed from a central location, which could be a server or a number of servers within your network. And PDM's it's focused on capturing and maintaining information on products through their development and useful life. And some of the information that it captures includes things like names of any persons that have either contributed to the design or the modification of a file. Maybe things like dates of transactions, like approvals and any changes to the files themselves. And then also information about things like where the file is used and what it's used for. So why would we be using PDM? Well, the reason we're using PDM is because it gives us some great benefits, and let's just go over some of those. So it allows us to quickly find files. So it speeds up our process, basically allows us to get to the data quicker. Everything in PDM's tracked. All transactions, such as changes to files, are all recorded. So everything's accountable. You've got one single repository which allows controlled access to data, as well as it gives you the ability to organize it in a logical manner. And that means for you guys, it's basically less time organizing and tracking down data, more time just doing work rather than managing the files themselves. And then having one single repository means basically one file in one place, which is great if you've got collaboration, maybe users spread out across different locations. Everything's in one place, you're all going to one file in one place. So it helps collaborate across the organization a little bit more seamlessly. Then we have to consider the advanced visual capabilities that we get from being able to quickly see where files are used, looking at reference trees of files, what's included in bill of materials, who's working on files, who's approved files, and so on. So based on all that information and answers to those questions we've just asked, you may ask, well, who would benefit from using PDM? The answer to this one is real simple. It's basically everyone. Anybody who has a file that you store on your PC or your network drive, you would benefit from putting that in the PDM system. So when would we use PDM? Well, as a new user, you're going to start using PDM as soon as it's installed and ready to go. And what PDM will do is it'll give you the ability to replace some things that you're maybe currently using. So you may currently have a database, PDM may be taking its place. If you don't have a database, you may be using something like Windows Explorer, a network drive, you may be using things like cloud applications, Dropbox, OneDrive, and so on. PDM would basically replace all of the above. And you'd move all your data into PDM, and then it becomes the single repository for everything. It's going to add a layer of security by controlling where your data resides and provides controlled access based on criteria such as file location or the status of the file. So once all your legacy data is migrated, that's your single source for retrieving documents, but it's also going to be the place where new documents will be located as well. So when you start with new documents, immediately you would save them to PDM. We also encourage that any and all other files are kept within the vault as well. And some examples of other organizations that I've done in the past include adding things like marketing documents, sales documents, human resources, any manufacturing information. All of this stuff, if it can be saved in Windows, it can be saved in PDM. All right, so with that said, and all those questions answered, let's take a look at the software itself. We're going to do a live demonstration now of the software, and we'll look at some of the functions and how we actually use it. So going through some of the simple functions like the user interface, how to log in, how to read the interface, what information it provides us, and then we'll use things like the search tools, and we'll talk about the workflows, check-in, check-out, and so on. So we'll start off with the user interfaces, and there's really two major user interfaces for PDM, as well as 3 add-ins. So one for SolidWorks, one for DraftSight, one for Microsoft Office. But just using PDM itself, you've really got 2 interfaces that you may be using. So one of them is the Web 2, or as we call it, the thin client. And then we also have the full UI, or the thick client, as we call it. Now, in this webinar, I'm going to focus on the thick client, as most persons will be familiar with this interface. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll spend a couple of minutes just going through the Web 2, as well as the add-ins. So at least you'll be familiar with where these are and what they look like. All right, so the first thing is the thick client. Like, how do we get into PDM? So very simple question, pretty straightforward for new users. All right, so this interface you're looking at right now, this is just Windows Explorer. I'm pretty sure everybody on this call is familiar with this. It's your computer screen, and when you fire up your computer, you have the ability to jump through your local drives. You may have network drives that you map to. You may have things like Dropbox or OneDrive or something like that. Traditionally, we see a lot of people use a network drive. If there's no database involved currently, it'll be a network drive, and there'll probably be a folder on there called engineering, and that's typically where everything goes. And it's kind of acts like a free-for-all for people to put data in and move data and change data and so on. Now, the way that PDM would change that is instead of jumping to that network drive, you would go to one of your local drives, and you'll see something called the Blueberry. We call this the Blueberry. Now, I have 2 vaults on my computer, and I'm going to focus on this one today. When you get set up with PDM, you would typically just have one of these, and that would be your single repository to access PDM and all your data. The way this works is you double-click on it, just like you would a normal Windows folder, to open it. But the difference is you get prompted for credentials. Now, these credentials are managed by your PDM administrator internally to your organization. So if you need help getting in here, your PDM administrator can validate your username, provide you with a password, and once you have that criteria, you can hit login, and it should take you into PDM. Now, what you see when you first get into PDM should be similar or the same as other users across your organization. And I say that because it's what you see and what you can do in here is based on permissions. And your permissions may change to other users, based on your role, your function, that kind of thing. But in a nutshell, what you're seeing here is an extension of Windows Explorer. So you see folders in here just like you would in a normal Windows environment. They're just a different color, the green instead of yellow or manila. But you can access them just like you can in a normal Windows environment. You double click, you can jump down, and you can go into these folders and you can see things. So at the root level, it's really not that much different from a typical Windows environment. However, down at the bottom here, you have this interface, which is the connection to PDM. Now, what you see down here is very much visual feedback from the system. So you don't actually need to do much down here. This is just giving you or providing you lots and lots of good information. So for example, let's go back into that projects folder and let's select one of these folders. With this data card tab active, I see information about that folder and its contents. If I was to click on a different folder, I get different information, and it's regarding that project, that folder, and its contents. Now, this will also work for files. So, for example, let's actually go back there, and we'll go into this folder. you'll notice there's a couple of files in here. I've got the data card active, and I click on a file. It provides me a lot of great information about the file itself. These are custom properties within the SOLIDWORKS file that are now being displayed on the data card. That means I don't have to open the file to see the description, the material, the project name, and all that good stuff. It's all right at my fingertips. Another really nice tool in the user interface is this tab on the left-hand side. So this one here is my preview tab. And what this does is it gives me the ability to see a picture of the file. Now, based on my current settings, I've got this set with my option to show the bitmap for SOLIDWORKS files, where I can show the bitmap, which allows me to very quickly navigate through the different 3D files. But then it gives me this, this green E in the middle. So if, for example, I want to do more with this file, like I might want to rotate it, measure it, mark it up, that kind of thing, I can simply click on this green E. And what that does is it loads the file in our viewer application called eDrawings. So you may be familiar with eDrawings already, but that actually works inside the preview window of SOLIDWORKS PDM. As you can see, now I'm able to rotate, zoom, and really get a better 3D view of this file. The eDrawings interface also extends a bunch of tools that are very, very useful to us. So one that I always like to show is the measure tool. So let's just say, for example, you're working in procurement and you want to validate that you're purchasing the right size piece. Okay, you can use the preview window, eDrawings interface, and the measure tool to validate that everything's correct before you go ahead and place an order. There's also some other great tools in the eDrawings interface as well. So if you're working in an assembly, you can do things like section views. You can even explode the assembly and animate the explosion so you can see internal components. So this preview window actually provides a great interface for viewing the files themselves. It works on other file types. So for example here, I've got a PDF, click on that. I can even preview the PDF. And if you have PDM Pro, you can use Office. Office documents will preview in here. Any application that you have a viewer installed on your computer, you can hook it up and you can use the viewer to see the contents of the files. So just like the data card, it speeds up your ability to access great information. You don't have to open files to see the contents. You don't have to open the file to actually visually look at the file itself. You can do all of that in this interface. Now, another thing that's pretty common in the PDM environment is the ability to find files quickly. When you go into PDM for the first time, you'll notice the folder structure. It's just like Windows, so you can make it logical. And you can always browse through folders to find things. But speeding up this process is the ability in PDM to include search tools. There's two search tools in PDM. There's a quick search that's in the software that allows you to quickly search for a file based on its name or some other criteria that you may specify. And then there's also an additional search tool that can work as a standalone application, but it also gives you a lot more search criteria, and it allows you to create favorites and even custom search tools. So let's take a look at how that works. So let's say, for example, here you get into PDM and you want to find a file called PIN. Well, using the search in the upper right-hand corner, you can quickly just search by file name. Now, this quick search tool that we're seeing in the top right here can also be extended so it looks through different properties of the files as well. So you'll notice with my results here, I'm bringing back a lot of files that match that search criteria, PIN. But some of these don't have PIN in the file name, and that's because PIN is actually in one of these properties that I'm also searching through. So in this example here, we can see in description, we have PIN. All right, so the nice thing about this quick search is I can very, very quickly jump into PDM, type in the criteria I want to search under, and I get results extremely fast right at my fingertips. So I'm not having to spend time digging through folders and looking through files. The other search tool is found right next to the quick search, and there's actually a drop down here. This one will work as a standalone application if you launch the search tool. So if you wanted to throw this on a different screen, you could do. This search tool can also be included in this interface. So you just basically select whatever searches are available to you from the drop down, and it opens up in the same window. And then, of course, you can do the same type of searches here. So you have the same capabilities. The searches themselves bring back results, and down at the bottom you have the same interface that we saw, where you can see the data card as well as the preview window. Now, this search tool itself, it also has a lot of criteria that can be included. So you can search through things like information that's particular to a data card. You can search through different variables. You can search for all files checked out by a certain user. Files that are in a particular approval state in the workflow. So there's a lot of search criteria you can use, but in a nutshell, what the search does for you guys is it allows you to very, very quickly find what you need and get to work. So that means you don't have to do a lot of data mining to find the right file to work on. You can get to work much, much quicker. So now that we've found the files that we need to work on, and we're able to preview the files and read the data card, we'll move on to the next tab, which, just to quickly show you, is this version tab here in the PDM interface. Now, the version tab itself, this is really a big part of the software, and it's a critical resource to all users of PDM. Now, the versions in PDM have their own tab and their own menu commands. And what version control gives you is really the ability to see the history of a file, to keep and potentially access all versions of files. And in the Pro version of the tool, you can even compare versions in PDM Pro. Now, a version is really every time a file is changed in PDM. In order to change a file in PDM, you have to go through a process called checkout and check-in. So, and checkout and check-in is really the ability for you to gain write access to a file, and then check-in is the ability to release your write access to the file. So in order to change your file, you check out, you make your modifications, save as many times as you want, and then when you're finished, you simply check in. Let's take a look at that in action. So I'm going to go back to my Explorer interface, and then let's go find a file, and we'll just do a very simple change on this file. All right, so viewing this file, you can see it's got version 1 of 1. So my local version I have is version 1. The latest version, which is on the network server that everybody's seeing, is also version 1. If I want to modify this file, then I go through the process of checkout. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. The checkout is found in the right mouse menu. It's found in the shortcut toolbar at the top. And it's also found in the actions menu. So 3 different places, they all do the same thing. Just a quick note, you can also open it in the application. And in SOLIDWORKS itself, there'll be the ability to check out the file. Right, so when you hit checkout, you are presented with a dialog that allows you to check out the file. It's also going to show you the reference tree. So if it was an assembly, it would show you the part references. It's giving me the ability to check out the drawing as well. So it's actually looking up the tree. So if I'm going to make a modification to this file, and I know the modification needs to control that file as well, then obviously I'd check both of those out. And when I check the file out, it shows here that I have the file checked out. So I have write access to this file. I can open it in its native application, and I can make a change to it. I can also make a change to the properties of the file. So in this example here, I'll just basically change the description. Once I hit save, the PDM system recognizes that the local file has been modified. So the version tab now gives me a dash for my local version, and it shows me that version 1 is the version that's on the server. So just to reiterate that, we'll do the same thing to the drawing. We'll make a change. We'll save the change. Now the version tab recognizes that these files have been modified. If we go ahead now and we've finished our modifications, the opposite of what we did, the checkout, is check-in. That is found in the same places. So all 3 different locations that we just saw, we can do the same operation. The check-in presents us with a dialog. Again, we can choose what files we want to check in. But it also presents us with this comment field down at the bottom. Now, our recommendation here is to use this to add information that may be relevant to the file or may be useful for the next user who's going to take a look at that file. Somebody wants to know what happened. When you complete the check-in process, you'll notice the version updates. So now we have version 2 of the file. If we take a look at the data card, you can see that's basically saved with those changes we've made. But here's where the power of versions come in. So first of all, we made a change to the file. What happened to the old version? Well, really nothing happened to it. It's still stored on the network, and it still can be accessed with the right permissions. So if you have permissions to do so, you can say, get me the version 1. It'll go get you it, and that version 1 shows you the file without the modifications. So it shows you the version 1 of the file. So that's one really nice thing, is you can change files, and this works for any document, by the way. So Office documents as well as CAD files. You can make your modifications to the files not have to worry about losing data, because all the versions are stored in the database on the servers, and they're all accessible given that you have the right permissions. Now, the other nice thing about this is when you are making changes to files and creating new versions, the history of it is also stored in the database. So, for example, if you want accountability, so you want to see who did what and when they did it, you would simply select the file and go to the history. Now you can see what user made the change, what date, what time, and then if you force those comments, they are added into the history dialog. So the version tab really is giving us great information about the files themselves. The check-in and check-out process is what you go through in order to create new versions. The next tab over is the Bill of Materials tab. The Bill of Materials, or BOM as we call it, provides a tabular listing on components of files referenced in a master file. Multiple BOM types are available. For example, SOLIDWORKS BOMs, weldment BOMs, and even named BOMs, which you can think of those as kind of like custom parts lists. BOM references are automatic for all SOLIDWORKS files, but other files can be manually added to Bill of Materials also. And like many other tools in PDM, your PDM administrator controls what you have access to and what Bill of Material types you can use. Extra note here is that Bill of Materials can be automatically exported with the Pro version of PDM in XML format. And that can be very useful if you have downstream operations that require access to that data. Bill of Materials tab, as I mentioned, is the next one over. In order to use this, you would just simply select it, and then anything that you click on, it will show you the Bill of Materials or the reference files for that master file. So at any level, you can select a file. If there's no references, nothing will be shown. If there are references, it will show in the Bill of Materials tab. Now, the types of Bill of Materials you have access to, again, this is controlled by your administrator. but in the top left corner, this is where you can access different bill of material types. So for example, here I have a purchasing bill of material. I also have my regular BOM. Now, we talked about the version tab in just a few slides ago, and versions are also available here in the bill of materials. So if, for example, an assembly bill changed, the versions were updated with new files or files were taken away, then the version for that assembly in the bill of materials tab you would access, and you would see a different bill of materials view for that version. And one thing I do like to point out here is that the capabilities of bill of materials in the PDM system goes above and beyond what you get in regular SOLIDWORKS CAD software. So what we're seeing right now is it's like a reference tree. So it's basically the CAD BOM that you're seeing. In this example here, I'm selecting the technical publication and it's showing me the CAD BOM. This is an SMG format, so SOLIDWORKS Composer document. And then even further up, I'm getting to the actual publication itself, which is in Word format. Now, as you can see on the Bill of Materials tab, this references the SMG file, the Composer document, which references the SOLIDWORKS assembly, which has its reference tree. So all of that shows in the Bill of Materials. Now, I mentioned we can do this manually as well, and I'd like to show a quick example here of manually creating a bill of materials, because these capabilities can be quite useful if you have different file types, maybe some legacy data in some old formats. So this quick example right here shows me I have a DWG file, which is the assembly document. I have files that are used in the assembly. These are all separate DWG files again. I have an installation document, which is a Word format, and then I have a finished picture of the assembly, which is just a simple JPEG. Now, as you could see while I was clicking through, there was no bill of materials shown for any of these. Now, what I might want to do here is create that bill of materials manually. So what I would do is I would simply check out the top level document. I can take the files that I want to be reference documents and do a process of copy, and then on the parent document itself, do a simple right click and paste as reference. Now what this does is it attaches those documents as references to that top level. And then when that top level is checked in, and I'll just write a quick note there for the history of the file, you can see it now creates a bill of materials for that top level document. So good example there using different file formats, but you can do this with any file. So it could be a SOLIDWORKS file, Word document, old legacy data, anything's good. And then to get the bill of materials from PDM, in the top right hand corner, there is the option to save as. So this will give you the option in PDM Pro to save as a named bill of materials. In PDM Standard and PDM Pro, you can save it as a CSV file. And that can be done for any file format. So here I'm just doing it on the DWG. If we go back to the file we were just looking at a few moments ago, the spreader, I have the same options right here. So that's the Bill of Materials tab, and it makes a very useful tool in the SOLIDWORKS interface for managing and maintaining bill of materials. Now the next two tabs over, these are the contains and where used. So they're a little bit like the bill of materials. When you look at the contains tab, it's giving you a reference tree. But the way I like to describe these is together, the contains and where used gives you the ability to look up and down the reference tree. So the information provided in these tabs can be particularly useful when you're about to embark on a change to a file, because it gives you the ability to determine if the change that you're about to make will affect other documents above or below it. in the reference tree. And then from that, you can decide if you need to make additional changes to other documents. So to quickly show you how this would work, same kind of scenario here. If I go to the Contains tab, I see down the tree, just like I did with the bill of materials. Anything that I see in here, there is an option to right-click and browse to. So if I go browse to this one, you see it takes me to a different folder. Now this contains no references, but if I was about to make a change to this, I could simply switch over to the Where Used tab. And then by switching over to all versions, I can see what versions of that file are used in what versions of the assembly. So that's quite a useful tool. It gives me the ability to look up and down the tree, and like I said, that allows me to make decisions about will my changes to this file affect other files. The next thing we're going to get into is the workflow. Now, the workflow, I like to say that the workflow is really the backbone of the PDM system. So when you're implementing PDM, this is an area that you give a lot of consideration to. And this is really where we gain a lot of intelligence and efficiency from the software itself. Think of the workflow as like being an electronic version of your procedure manual. If your procedure manual states that your documents must have a set of checks and balances before being released to manufacturing, then the workflow that you configure, or that we configure for you, should be configured to electronically reflect that approval process. The workflows additionally control access to files at different stages. So through the approval process, you might want to change who can modify files, who can access them, and that can be all done with permissions through the workflow. As a file flows through the workflow can automatically update file properties with things like revisions, electronic signatures, and more. And it can also send out notifications to let the next person down the line know that the file's coming and we require them to do something with it. The way that files move through the workflow is using something called state changes. Now, a state change is a mechanism, or what we call a transition. So it's a transition from one state to another as the file progresses through the workflow itself. Now, to access this function, you can right-click on a file, or there is a menu at the top, and you can access the transition through that as well. Now, just a little point I have on my slide right there, the files have to be checked in to change state. So we talked about checking in, checking out when we're doing modifications. If you're going to move the file through the approval process and through the workflow, then the file must be checked in. The transitions themselves, what appears to you, again, is controlled by permissions. So what your administrator allows you to do is what shows up and what you have the ability to do right here. Let's take a look at this one in action. So for this one here, we're going to jump into this folder here, and I'm actually going to grab a real simple structure here. If we take a look at this drawing, you can see it's just a part and a drawing. Now, the drawing itself, if we look at the face of the drawing, we have a watermark on it. It tells us it's not approved for manufacturing. If we zoom in a little bit to the title block, we have no engineering approved, and we have no revision on the file. If we look at the interface at the top, we have a column here that says states, and it shows us that the file is in a state called under editing. Now, if we wanted to move this through the workflow, you could either access the change state transition through the right mouse menu, or you could access it through the modify menu. They both do the same thing. When you select the file, it brings up a change state transition dialog. And in here, you can add some great information. The first thing that I want to do is I want to transition both files together. So I'm going to check the box that brings the CAD file, the 3D file, along with the 2D drawing. This can be configured to automatically be checked for you. So it's, again, something that's configured by the administrator. In the transition dialog, there's a comment here. And I'll just put a quick note in there of what I'm doing. There's another note field, which is the notification comment. So this would be what you would notify the next person down the line. They would receive this notification comment in an email. Okay, so we'll add that. And then over on the right-hand side, you get to pick who is being notified. So in this case here, I'm going from a state called under editing, and I'm submitting it for approval. So I'm going to pick a manager here, and we'll pick Grayson. That means he is going to get the notification. When we hit change state, you can see the file goes to the next state in the workflow process, which is waiting for approval. Now, as I mentioned, the permissions can be controlled at this level. So we can stop engineers from, or drafters from checking out files when they're waiting for approval. And what that would mean is we would have to log out of the system and log back in to move this through the next workflow transition. And for this one, I'm going to take on the role of the approver. And we'll simply log back into the vault and we will find that file in that location at that workflow state waiting for approval. So we have a decision to make here. We would review the file and we would either send it back for changes or we would approve it for manufacturing. We would follow the same process and we'll say that this is now past approval. We get the same dialog that pops up for the transition. We'll add a comment here. And we'll add a notification comment. And we'll send that back to Chris. So when the file now goes through change state, it goes from waiting for approval to approved. If we refresh our view down at the bottom, we can see that now the file's watermark shows that it's released for manufacturing. We can see it gets a revision on the file, and we can see the engineering approval has been added to the title block also. Now, to just quickly review what we've done, the workflow itself is where we obtain things like electronic signatures, automatic notifications, and it's where we can do things like incrementing the revisions of the files. As I mentioned earlier, the workflow is basically our electronic approval process. The workflow just simply makes our job of managing documents and approving documents much easier by doing a lot of these manual tasks for us electronically. All right, so let's go over some of the things that we've learnt in this presentation. So things to remember. In order to make a change to a file, you must check the file out. You can save as many times as you like when you're making those modifications, but when you complete those changes, you must check the file back in. When you've completed the check-in, during the check-in process, we actually advise that you add comments detailing the changes you've made so that other users can understand those changes. And just remember, everything's logged in PDM. The checkout, the check-in, the comments, all the versions of the files, old versions, they're all logged and retrievable from the PDM interface. Some other things to remember, and I've highlighted at the top of this slide, permissions control everything. I've mentioned quite a few times with the required permissions, you can do this. So permissions are very granular in PDM. There's a lot of them, and your administrator controls the permissions. So if you can or can't do something, there's a good chance it's a permission that you just need granting. Now, users can add and move things around just like Windows Explorer with the required permissions. The idea here is that we want to keep the PDM system clean and organized, and we want to standardize everything in there. You can add additional folder structure as you need because it's Windows Explorer. So just like you do right now in Windows, you can right-click and add folders, add files, drop files into the folders. We recommend conforming to standards for aesthetics and searchability when you're browsing through the folders. But again, just to reiterate, permissions is what's going to allow you or deny you from doing any of those things. When you're done with PDM, you need to log off. The licenses in PDM are floating. So best practice is when you're done, simply log off your PDM system. The way you could do that is in the upper right-hand corner, you will see a little blue icon for your user account. And you just simply hit the drop down and there's an option to log out right there. That takes you out of the PDM system. It frees up your license. The license goes back into the pool. Now other users can access that license. All right, at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that there are other interfaces in PDM. So I mentioned there is a web interface, and I mentioned that there are some additional add-ins. Now, I don't want to get real deep into these, but I do want to show you the functionality just so you are aware of what these look like, where they are, and there may be the option or the ability for you at some point to adopt these tools to make your environment a little bit more and make the functionality a bit more friendly for you guys. So again, if you like what you see, you need more details, you have any questions about these, you can always jot something in the chat window on the right hand side, and we would be happy to follow up with you and provide more detail and overviews for you if you need to. All right, so let's start with the Web 2 interface. Now, the Web 2 interface is a client interface without the need to install the client software. So this can be made available for the internet as well as the intranet, so internal or World Wide Web. And it's great for occasional users. So people who maybe just go into PDM once in a while to view a drawing, that reduces the need for you to install client software. It's also great for like external contractors, remote workers, temporary workers. They can also take advantage of this interface. Now, the same permissions that you have in the thick client would be followed here into the Web 2 application. So you can access your files. You can also download from the vault here. You can upload files, again, all based on permissions. And then you can actually be part of the approval process as well in the Web 2 interface. So if you're using the Web 2 for reviewing and you want to be part of the approval process, then this application, this interface can be used for that. Let's take a quick look at the Web 2 interface on my PC. So again, you launch this through a browser, whatever browser you want, your favorite browser. It brings up the login window that looks like this. You would choose which vault, or if you only have one, you would only have one option here. You choose the license type. You can narrow these options down so there is no picking. So you can automatically say, go to this vault, use this license type. The web license is like your ability to check files out, check files in, upload, download, that kind of thing. The viewer is view only. So if you have people who are just occasionally viewing files, then you can lock them to the viewer license. And then just like in the thick client, you would type in your username and password, so get your credentials in there, and then you would simply hit login. Now, the interface itself, browsing through the folders, is very similar. You just simply click on them and you can narrow down your search by browsing through the folders. You do have a search tool in here in the top right-hand corner, and it's a very simple search. Again, just type in what you're looking for, hit enter, and it'll bring back results. If there are any files you want to preview in here, you would just simply select them. They'll show up with a bitmap image. And then again, just like in the thick client, you can hit the E and it'll download it into eDrawings. And now you've got the ability to 3D preview. So taking files out of PDM Web 2 is as simple as hitting the download button. And changing state on files is as simple as hitting the change state button in the upper right and then just picking what transition you want to move the file through. So as you can see, the web interface, the Web 2 interface, it's a very simple interface to use. The nice thing about this is you don't have to load any client software. The next interface I'm going to get into is the SOLIDWORKS add-in. So this is a reasonably important one right here for anybody who's doing CAD work, which with PDM, it could be quite a lot of you. In the CAD software, the PDM acts as a tab on the right-hand side, and it's just turned on through the add-ins menu. So you would simply check the box on the left for your current session, on the right for every session, so every time the software starts up. Now, opening files through here, it's no different to any other when you're opening files without PDM. So you could go to File, Open. If you're not logged into PDM, it will require you to do so. And you could simply select files from here and just choose Open. It will prompt you for checkout if you don't have the file checked out. You don't have to. It'll open read-only. You can make modifications to the file without affecting things on the server. And then if you do decide you want to make those modifications permanent, you can come back and check it out at any time. On the right-hand side of your interface in the task pane, you have interaction with the PDM system through these icons at the top. So version access is through this drop down here. The latest version is the first icon. Check-in, check-out, where used, state changes, data cards, jump to the file in Explorer. All of those tools are available. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the search tools are also available here as well. And then finally, the Microsoft add-in. This is available in PDM Professional. The Microsoft add-in is, when installed, is a tab at the top of your interface. And same capabilities. You have check-in, check-out, version access, data card access, as well as the ability to move files through the workflow state and search the PDM vault. So I'd like to finish by thanking you for attending today's webinar. I hope your time in attendance is time well spent, and I hope you go away with some more knowledge than what you came with. So hopefully I've shown you something, even if you maybe were a PDM user for a long time. If you have any additional questions, or if there's anything further we can do for you, here's some contact information for you to jot down and ways to reach out to us. And then you can also reach our support group directly as well. So if you'd rather submit a ticket through to our support group, our email address is down there at the bottom, solidworksupport@mlc-cad.com. And our direct phone number is 800-364-1652, extension 2. And then finally, I want to just make sure that you're aware, MLC CAD Systems is on all social media platforms, and we're constantly updating these. So please make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. If you're using LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, make sure you subscribe to those. And like I say, the content is constantly being updated and posted to those different social media channels. I'm Chris Sauter with MLC CAD Systems, and it's been my pleasure presenting to you today.